Well, anger over systemic racism and calls for more police accountability have also been expressed here in Canada. And this week, on Wednesday and Thursday, they'll be expressed in what's being called a scholar strike, a protest action by educators and students on college and university campuses right across this country. And to talk about this, we are reaching out right now to Beverly Bain. She is a professor of women and gender studies at the University of Toronto. She's also one of the organizers of the scholar strike in Canada. So thank you for joining us today, Beverly. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Michael, for having me.
Listen, let's begin at the start here. Talk to us about what the idea is with this scholar strike and how this even all got started.
Well, as you probably have heard, that it started with the NBA and WNBA's going on strike following the shooting of Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times and is now paralyzed from the waist down. And of course, that is after, so many shootings and killings of people like Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. And also that was followed up by a scholar strike in the U.S. And a number of us from the 4 universities in the city, U of T, OCAD-U, Ryerson and York, decided that we should come together and create this scholar strike, which meant that we will not be teaching in our classrooms the 9th and 10th, but instead we will be hosting and delivering teachings on police violence, on anti-Black racism, on colonialism and anti-Indigenous violence.
So it's not as if you're saying to students to stay away from school on these 2 days. What you're saying is come to school and we're going to create a space to have a dialogue and discussion about how racism and systemic racism exists in this country.
What we're saying is that as faculty, we're calling on faculty not to be teaching their actual courses on those days. And that we are saying to faculty instead, attend these teachings that are delivered by other faculty and activists and encourage your students to also participate in them.
What kind of response is this getting, though, Beverly? I wonder, I can imagine.
Sorry. It's getting countrywide response. People are very enthusiastic because people are tired of the ongoing violence. I mean, here in Canada, we have seen, the shooting of DeAndre. We've seen the shooting of Chantal Moore, an Indigenous woman. We have seen, there is the unresolved or, suspicious death of, Kwashinsky Paquette. We continue to see the escalation of police anti-Black violence and anti-Indigenous violence in this country. And I think it is very clear to all of us that this is enough, and that as scholars who are also part of that population, who also live in the real world where they are predisposed to these kinds of violence, and also, our allies are saying enough is enough. And we're saying to our institution that putting out a statement is not enough, that they also have to do more. They also have to actually ensure that within the institution that they are not participating in policies and processes that also, extends this kind of violence to scholars within the institution.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it's interesting because you do raise the issue of systemic racism, and we're speaking a lot right now about returning to school following the start of the pandemic, but it's also back to school following sweeping protests against anti-Black police brutality. So I'm wondering about your opinion. Are schools doing enough to actually respond to those calls for change?
No, they're not. Universities are not doing enough. Schools are not doing enough. We are constantly hearing, we're constantly witnessing, and I can speak for the universities because that's where I'm placed, I'm located. We're constantly seeing within the institution the underrepresentation of Black and Indigenous and racialized scholars in all departments, pretty much. We're also seeing that there are certain kinds of surveillance and ongoing kinds of policies and processes that can harm us, such as campus police, and the insistence that we invest in a kind of policing within the institution that criminalizes professors and students, or that can and has criminalized students in those contexts. And we are saying that we have to be responsible, or we have to hold our administration accountable and say to them that they cannot and we will not condone the participation in the extension of the carceral state within our institution.
Beverly, I only have about 30 seconds left, but I do want to ask you. You mentioned this action being taken amongst academic staff at the 4 universities in the Greater Toronto area. What about other schools in other provinces and other cities? Have they reached out? Are they also taking part in these days of action?
In fact, across the country, we've heard from out west, we've heard from out east, where universities are actually doing their teachings. They're doing several teachings at their university as part of this scholar strike. So people are really getting on board. It's, as we can say, it's catching fire, and it's caught on because I think it resonates with everybody, and all scholars and staff and individuals. Primarily because we've seen the ongoing escalation at the intersection of the pandemic during the summer. We've seen the uprisings and the protests to end this violence, yet the violence continues.
Well, as we keep noting, this is a moment of global reckoning. Beverly Bain, thank you. Appreciate the time today.
Thank you very much.
And Ms. Bain is a professor of women and gender studies at the University of Toronto.